November 9th, 1983, 4 minutes to 7. Freddy Heineken walks out the door of the Heineken office. His chauffeur is waiting for him at the car door. Suddenly 3 people grab Heineken and his driver. They force him into a van and drive off into the night. This is the story of the Heineken kidnapping. Freddy Heineken was born in 1923. Although his grandfather originally started a Heineken brewery, by the time he entered the company in 1941, the family had lost majority ownership. But over his first couple of years he bought shares until he controlled 50% of the company. By 1983 he was one of the richest men in Europe, leading to him being a perfect target for kidnapping. His would-be kidnappers consisted of 4 childhood friends: Willem Holleeder, also known as the Nose, Cor van Hout, Jan Boulaert and Frans Meijer. This group started a criminal career by forcefully evicting squatters in the 70s. In 1974 they performed a robbery in the middle of Amsterdam, using a speedboat to escape through the Amsterdam canals. They started several businesses but they weren't profitable, so the group decided to do something big. Willem Holleder's dad worked at Heineken for his entire life and looked up to Freddy Heineken. The relationship between Willem and his dad wasn't good and he was often abused. So kidnapping Heineken would not only be profitable, it would also be a small revenge for Holleder against his father. Like we said in the introduction, the kidnapping of Heineken and his driver happened in front of the Heineken office. Willem Holleder and his group had been ready to kidnap Freddy in front of his house multiple times, but he didn't show up. After they took Heineken, they hid him and his driver in a carpentry factory in the harbor district of Amsterdam. The pair was hidden in a Romney hut behind a hidden wall in 2 soundproof cells, chained to the walls. The kidnappers demanded 35 million Dutch guilders, which is around 32 million euros in today's money, or $34 million. They demanded this money by forcing Freddy and his driver to record tapes with the kidnappers' demands, and then they proceeded to play these tapes through the phone for the family of Heineken. They did this so their voices couldn't be recognized. The kidnappers' demands couldn't be met at first, because they requested the money to be transported in a white van with red crosses on the side, and the van couldn't be followed. But because the kidnapping garnered a lot of media attention, the police couldn't assure this van wouldn't be followed by the media. The police shared this information to the kidnappers by placing advertisements in the paper. The friends and family of Heineken refused to negotiate about the amount of money they would pay, even though the police wanted to. They didn't want Mr. Heineken to find out they had tried to negotiate with his life. At this point Heineken did not know his driver had also been kidnapped. When the doors of the cells, which faced each other, were opened at the same time and he found out his driver was also kidnapped, he reportedly jokingly shouted to him, "What do they want to do with you? You don't have any money." Although this was meant to lift the driver's spirit, it only led to him becoming worried. Although Freddy was coping relatively well with his imprisonment, his chauffeur was apparently not doing well, with even the kidnappers expressing remorse about the toll it was taking on the driver. On the 28th of November, 19 days after the kidnapping started, the ransom was finally going to be paid. The money would be delivered in 5 bags by an unarmed police officer. He would get instructions to drive to certain locations through a phone. The police officer drove throughout the entire country for 4 hours until he was finally ordered to stop on an overpass. And there he was ordered to drop the money off. At this point, it was deep in the night, but the kidnappers were being followed by a helicopter with a camera, until the gyroscope that held the camera steady broke, and the kidnappers were lost into the night. The kidnappers hid around 20 million underground in barrels in the woods. The other 15 million they split between each other. The plan was originally to call the police once they were out of the country, but an anonymous tip where 3 out of the 4 kidnappers were named gave the location of Heineken. A police team stormed the building, but they couldn't find a hiding spot. On the verge of giving up, one police officer proposed to check the length and width outside and compare it with the length and width inside to see if there are any secret spaces. They found out the outside of the building was 4 meters longer than the inside. They found Heineken and his driver. They were both mildly confused but physically okay. After Heineken and his driver were found, many people were arrested, from family members of the kidnappers to colleagues. Franz Meyer turned himself in, but escaped prison after finding out how long his sentence was going to be. Cor van Hout and Willem Holleder escaped together to Paris, but were arrested by the French police after 3 months. At the time, the French and Dutch government didn't have an extradition treaty that included kidnapping, so they were put under house arrest in France. The government moved them around a lot, even taking them to the Caribbean possessions of France. This caused a bit of a commotion because they would land in the south of Sint Maarten, which is part of the Netherlands. Willem Holleder and Cor van Houten convinced their captors to reroute the plane. In the Caribbean, the locals weren't happy with criminals being dumped on their island. This caused such unrest that Holleder and Van Houten had to flee the French part of Sint Maarten on a boat without lights and take shelter on an uninhabited island until they could be saved by a helicopter. Eventually, they were brought back to the French mainland. A new extradition treaty had been signed and the two friends were extradited to the Netherlands. The four kidnappers were put on trial and they all got around 10 years. Franz Meyer was able to escape to Paraguay, but he was extradited in 2002 and released in 2005. Since then, he remained active in the underworld, being arrested again in 2019 for a robbery of a money transport, and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Cor van Hout and Holleder were released in 1992, and at a party for their release at the Marriott in Amsterdam, the Heineken jingle was played when they walked in. Of the 35 million guilders, 15 million was split between the kidnappers, and 19 million was hidden. The 1 million was given to somebody who had a minor role in the kidnapping. Franz Meyer immediately burned his part of the money, considering it blood money. The money that was hidden was also found by the police. Of the 35 million guilders, a total of 27 million guilders was found. The last 8 million guilders were never recovered.
Come, subscribe.